Thank you for joining the AAN Applying to Child Neurology Residency in 2022 webinar. All participants are muted. For questions to the panelists, please use the Q&A feature and we will answer them throughout. I'm pleased to introduce our panel members for today. Our moderator is Dr. Audrey Foster Barber, Program Director at UCSF. Our panelists are Dr. Erin Nelson, Program Director at NYU Langone Health, Dr. Jamika Hallman-Cooper, Program Director at Emory University, Dr. Adriana Morel, Resident at UCSF, Dr. Gayatri Raj Ghosh, Resident at NYU Langone Health, and Dr. Benjamin Siegel from Emory University. Dr. Foster Barber, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, and welcome everybody. We are happy to have you here to the AAN's webinar in support of child neurology applicants. You may have seen other webinars specific to different residency programs, but we're really excited to welcome you all to the match and give you advice that is separate from advertisements for any particular program and more just supportive of everybody who is joining our exciting field. So, you know, we know this is always a high stakes experience for all of you. This is the culmination of all of your med school training. And it's been different in the last few years being virtual, but we've learned a lot. So you have 3 program directors and 3 residents here who can really give advice on the process, answer your questions. That's what we're here for today. I think what we'll do is start by having each person introduce themselves here. I'll call each of you and just the panel can say a little bit about themselves and give one piece of advice for applicants. And then we're gonna move forward with some of the questions that you can put into the Q&A feature. So I'll start just to say, my name's Audrey. I grew up in Florida and I did all of my training here at UCSF. And I think my main piece of advice to applicants is that we're happy you found child neurology. Not everybody does until they've gotten further into their training. It's an amazing field. And really, once you've gotten to the point of applying and interviewing, you will find a home. And it's really a matter of allowing this interview process to be a time that you show yourself and you learn about these programs and find the one that will work best for you. So our goal today is really to give you some tips on both of those things. So I think I'll toss it off to Dr. Nelson to do the same.
Great, thanks. So I'm Aaron, born and raised in Iowa, but I'm now the program director in New York and NYU Langone Health. Welcome to everyone. My main advice as you think about this process from a philosophical standpoint is to not necessarily assume that there is only one absolute right choice and to not agonize over that. There are probably many right choices. There can be wrong ones and wrong fits, and you want to avoid that, but there's probably many more right choices where you'll thrive than not. And so I would just think about that and really, as you get to know programs, try and focus on what will serve you the best.
Excellent, thank you. And Dr. Hallman-Cooper, I'll have you go next.
Hi, I'm Jamika Hallman-Cooper. Welcome to everyone. I'm very excited to see you guys here and applying to pediatric neurology. I grew up in Georgia, a city called Augusta, Georgia, and I'm here at Emory University Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. My advice for this process is that it's similar to what Dr. Nelson has already said, is to really, as you're interviewing with programs, remember that you should be interviewing us as well and looking for something that fits you well. Think about those things that you need to thrive, and if that program has that for you. Residency anywhere is going to have its set of challenges, and so you want to make sure you're in an environment that you feel like you're supported and that you'll be able to perform at your best.
Thank you. And now let's go to our wonderful resident doctors. So Dr. Adriana Morel, I'll have you start with the same.
Hello, everyone. I'm so happy you guys came to learn all about our wonderful specialty. I'm Adriana. I'm from Houston, Texas, and spent most of my time in Houston. Now I'm at UCSF, so a little bit colder. And I think my one piece of advice is kind of find your fit, your vibe, your family, because your residency is hard anywhere you go. And when you find, the residents that you interact with the best and the residents that you like feel your family, having that support around you is really important. And the same goes with the faculty and all the attendings that you work with. Well, it makes a difference.
Thank you. And then Gayatri Raj Ghosh, I'll have you do the same.
Hi, I'm Gayatri. I am from Michigan. I also did med school in Michigan, a school called Oakland University, and now I'm a resident at NYU. I'm currently a fourth year. My biggest advice would be to take advantage of the time that you have during fourth year in terms of like the free time that you have, and kind of before going through the interview process, take some time to reflect on the values that are most important to you. Because I found going through my interview process, obviously the programs are all going to train you well, but things that really end up mattering to me most are how I saw my life, how my family would be incorporated into the city that I would be in. So just kind of figure out what's most important to you, whether it's research, whether it's location, whether it's the city where you want to live, because sometimes those things end up helping you decide where you want to go more so than what the program is itself.
Absolutely. And then Dr. Ben Siegel.
Hey everybody, and I'm happy you're all here. This is a very, very cool field, and I'm excited you're applying into it. It's kind of a hidden gem in medicine but once you find it, it's been a real pleasure so far for me, at least in residency. I'm a fifth year at Emory. I grew up in Atlanta and then went to college in Pittsburgh, and then came back down to Emory for med school, and then stayed on for residency here. And I guess the advice that I would give is kind of similar to what other panelists have said. Is it's a match, and it's a matchmaking process of finding a good residency. You want to find somewhere where you gel, and I think specifically I think sometimes we can get kind of focused on things like reputation and more superficial things that don't really matter when they come for most people. And to really focus on where you vibe with and where your interests lie, and not just on the name of the institution being a major factor.
Thank you. Really good beginning advice there. As people are starting to put questions in the Q&A, we'll probably start with talking a little bit about the application process. This is, I'm sure, on everybody's mind. And I thought I would actually have Dr. Nelson help us start with some of the common questions that we get about the logistics of the application.
Yeah, so as you're thinking about applying, and obviously if you're joining this webinar, you are. Most people don't get to this point. So as you're putting things together, you want to think about your letter writers, and you really want to have someone who can talk about you as an individual. While it's important to have someone from child neurology, ideally, one if not more of those letters, letters mean much more when they read as someone who actually knows you. A letter from someone who is very important that reads like a regurgitated CV is not much help to a program director. Much more about your individual personality, your work ethic, what drives you, those sorts of things are very helpful. And then I would extend that into personal statements as well. I'm not a big believer in you've got to grab people with some very unique line or quote at the beginning. Fortunately, child neurology is a small enough field that I think all of us program directors read all of the personal statements in great detail. And so really what you want to try and do is you want to tell your story, your personal narrative in a way that really helps us understand more how you got to medicine, what's going to drive you both in training and then potentially afterwards, long term. Because a lot of the people that we take in training are people that we're going to work with long term and train and know for many years to come. I'll end with that for that question, unless you want more details about other aspects of the application process.
Maybe what we can do is turn to Dr. Hallman Cooper to talk about some of the harder questions that come up about, what's the phenotype of people applying, or do they all have to have research? What other activities? And what if you have a quote unquote red flag in your application? How, what does that mean for us, and how can you address it?
Yeah, definitely. So in terms of the quote unquote phenotype of people applying, I think they're all comers. Pediatric neurology is a large field with a lot of different subspecialties and areas that you can go into. So many of us do clinical research. Some of us do more so basic science research. There's certainly people who go into private practice, people who stay in academics. And so there is a need for all of those types of people. And so that's what we're looking for. We're looking for a diversity of applicants. It's always helpful to have some research on your application, but that's not something that is a requirement. And recognizing that we are taking a holistic look at your application. And so we're looking at what are your experiences, what life experiences kind of led you to the path of pediatric neurology, how much exposure have you had to pediatric neurology, and again, as we are wanting to bring a diversity of people to the field, we're looking at cultural background, socioeconomic status. How do you mesh with the particular program you're applying to? So we're looking at various things on the application. There's not a checklist for everyone should have done these particular things to make yourself stand out. In terms of red flags, I am a proponent for addressing those up front. So oftentimes, like Dr. Nelson was saying, in your personal statement, you provide a narrative for how you came to medicine, how you found pediatric neurology, and what you want to do within pediatric neurology. There's also an opportunity in your personal statement to address any red flags that you may have. For example, if you had a particular clerkship that you didn't perform as well in, you can certainly address whatever details there was that led up to that performance and what you've learned from that experience and how you've altered your approach going forward, how you're going to do things differently to avoid that pitfall in the future. I don't think it's wise to necessarily camouflage it or hide it. I think if you bring it up and talk about what you've learned from it and how you've changed from it, then it gives us a chance to know that you actually have some self-reflection and that you're able to pivot from difficult situations.
Thank you. And I'm going to try to answer the numbers question, because this comes up, as we talk to students at our own institutions, it comes up in questions. How many applications should you be putting in? How many places should you interview? And we're lucky enough that the NRMP actually tracks outcomes. So what I can tell you is the last 2 virtual interview years, what we know is that every single one of the US MD and DO graduates who applied and interviewed in child neurology and put in a rank list matched somewhere. And that the number of international medical graduates who matched actually doubled in the last year. So this is a place where once you are, getting interviews and are thoughtful about your rank list, you will find your home. The average number of applications was between 23 and 30, although most applicants did not then interview at all of those places. But we know from the NRMP data that for US medical and DO graduates, if they ranked between 11 and 12 places, they matched. And then I think the largest number needed to rank was about 16 for students in slightly different circumstances. So I hope that helps a little bit with the numbers. We all very much don't want people, applying to 100. There are actually only, I think, 166 places anyways, but we don't need that. We need you to think about where you would want to be for your life, and hopefully those numbers help a little bit with that. And there is a question in the Q&A about outlining specific rotations in pediatric neurology. Is that necessary within your ERAS application? And maybe Dr. Nelson, I don't know if you've had a chance to peek at it, but maybe I'll have you try to answer that.
Yes, so I have strong feelings about this. If you need to list your pediatric neurology rotations specifically in experiences, then you've done something wrong in some other part of your application. Because if you're doing that, it should be in your personal statement, talking about what you've done in the rotations. If you've done an away rotation, which different people have different feelings about, but I think it's a very useful thing to do, then they'll see that as well. Honestly, if you've done rotations, those should be who your letter writers are, the people you've worked with the most, who know you the best. So I wouldn't bother. And if you feel like you need to, I would take a second look at those other aspects of your application and flesh that out so that it's reflected there.
Thank you. And overall, all program directors are aware that these last few years have been strange, and not everyone has been able to do an away rotation or, do as much with a child neurologist as they would like, or maybe one of those things was virtual. And we definitely are 100% understanding of that, and will not be making comparisons to, someone got to do one in person and someone else didn't. We're just wanting to get to know you, and we all know that our circumstances have been a little bit different. Even when people can take some steps of the boards is sometimes a little bit delayed, and we're all completely understanding of that. Our holistic review process is really meant to recognize the systemic ways that some of our grading systems have not always been fair to students, but also the ways that the pandemic has changed students' experience, and take that into account. I'd like to maybe move just a little bit into the virtual interview process itself, and hear from our two program directors about best practices, advice, the kind of things that students should expect or should do to prepare. So I'll just go in order again with Dr. Nelson.
So I'll talk on the more technical aspects. And so obviously know where you're going to do them in advance, set up the environment, check your Wi-Fi. If you have a way to have a backup or a Wi-Fi hotspot, or use your cell phone to tether, have a backup. Know where the links are for things. As a program director, I've been at the institution and had things fail. And then within about genuinely 10 to 15 seconds, I was at least back up on it on my phone. Right? So someone wasn't left in the void or hanging, or those sorts of things. I think in this day and age, no one has any problem with headphones. So if you're better or more comfortable with headphones or other things to make it a reasonable environment, we know that people from different backgrounds really may have different accessibility to a quiet area to do interviews. And I think everyone will be understanding of that. So you should really do whatever is necessary from your perspective to be able to best hear the interviewers, to be able to best answer, and those sorts of things. And then I would practice currently where technology is. You have to pretend to make eye contact with the camera, which is what I'm doing right now. Obviously, in a few years, hopefully the cameras will be embedded in the screen. It'll be much more natural, but it's not right now. So I would practice those skills and have someone you know or knows you see how it's coming across through that virtual interactive platform.
That's great. Thank you. Dr. Hallman-Cooper, do you want to add to that?
I don't have much to add to that. He covered it quite nicely. Definitely practice doing it virtually, because it feels a lot differently. It feels a lot different. making sure that, again, that your camera is clear, that your microphone is clear, and that you do have a backup for technical issues. But we all understand and we all anticipate that there may be some technical issue that happens. And so that's not something that we are holding against you if it does happen during the interview. And most times we give you a backup way of getting back into the system once if you do get locked out. So
Yeah,
I'll
most.
also say-
Go
sorry.
ahead.
Remember time zones. Actually, more than any other technical issue, that was during the virtual interview experience. The big thing that changed is we had people jump on an hour or two late sometimes because of time zones and sort of missing that difference in the email.
Oh gosh, I didn't even think of that. Thank you. I do think that as programs, we're trying to be aware of the time zones and not run things really late so that, from San Francisco, the East Coasters are, yawning at 9:30 and we're still talking. We're trying to avoid that. And also give breaks because, as we all know, it can be pretty fatiguing to sit virtually, but we also recognize technical things will happen. And most programs, you'll have a backline to the program coordinator who's running interviews. So if somehow you can't get on somewhere, you can reach them quickly. And we definitely aren't holding those technical things against you. I do think that the virtual interview is challenging for programs too, because we want to walk you down the halls and show you the view and, get the vibe of the city. And so we definitely do our best to show that. And one of the best ways is actually interacting with our residents. So I actually wondered if I could have some of the senior residents who are on here comment on the roles that you guys played in the interview process, or how you tried to help applicants to get to know the place and the personality of the place. Because Adriana smiled, I'm going to call on her, Dr. Morell, first, but we will do a little round robin so you can each comment.
So I think that, as residents, we're some of the best people you can talk to about how it feels to live in the city as a resident on a resident salary. And of course, what else you're able to do in your time that's free, which there is some time. We held these sessions, I'll call them, via Zoom after interviews, just to chat with residents, ask them any questions, and then through that, try to illustrate how living in the city, for example, city of San Francisco, how that is and how feasible it is, and telling people like what we like to do, and try to gauge or ask them any questions about whatever they wanted to know. But I think we were able to sometimes illustrate life in the city of San Francisco as a resident, but it's really hard, and we acknowledge it's hard to understand what it really feels like, especially like coming from somewhere so far away.
Dr. Raj Ghosh, do you want to comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think, we're all aware that it like virtual interviews are a little awkward because, it's hard to just kind of know when it's appropriate to speak up. Like when you're in a big room of, Zoom chat, you don't know if like now's an okay time to talk or should I wait for someone else. But I think, as much as I would say would just be to try to just be yourself and try to do things as naturally as it would, like pretend like you are in the room filled with people and just say if things comes up, and it's, if you just need to take a step back while someone else is talking, like it's really not a big deal. I think we all kind of understand. And then just like ask questions as they come up too. And if you feel more comfortable, I think at least when I was on the interview trail, even though they were in person, most residents offered the option to, if you want to reach out, here's how you can reach one of us. You can, email people personally or things like that, or whatever that program offers you as a way to communicate with residents, to take that up as well. If you feel kind of uncomfortable, like trying to figure out what the city is like or what the program is like in that Zoom space, take advantage of the resources that they present to you to get to know the program in other ways.
Thank you. And Dr. Siegel, any additional comments?
Yeah, I agree with what everybody else is saying, and like Gayatri was saying, we're kind of all in this together with this virtual world of interviews and Zooms and things, and just kind of acknowledging the inherent awkwardness and unnaturalness of it, and moving past it together is the best advice I can give. Is just kind of, it is weird, and just pretending like you're in the same room with them even though you're not, and just pretend like play acting like you would in like an OSCE or something in medical school. The other thing we did, and I don't know if y'all did it, we had these little PowerPoints that we would go through and then show pictures of the city and stuff. And like the night before the interview, which was I think a nice way of kind of showing the city a little bit. I think that whenever we do these, especially the social hours, which most residencies have, there's always like downtime between questions and things, or even at the end of interviews, there's kind of that downtime. Something that you can do as an applicant to prepare for those moments of silence is have a list of, and you can write them down beforehand, of just like your go-to questions, that because you're going to get that question at the end of the session of like, do you have any questions for me? And it's nice if you have at least one, even if you kind of know the answer, just to have a question or two that you can ask to show your interest and to keep the conversation going can be helpful.
Yeah, I do think that, all of the programs will provide some information in advance, either an email with maybe some video links or, a website link. And it can feel like actually a lot of homework, especially if you've applied to a lot of places. But there is something good out of, at least right before your interview, maybe going to the website of the program and of the hospital, and maybe reading a little bit about the providers, a little bit about the program. So you have a sense before you come in, and so you can maybe ask some specific questions. It can be really helpful. Some of the stuff, like all the other fun videos, maybe you look at more before you put your rank list in, just to kind of get that gut feeling. But information about the program itself is worth a little review beforehand, so that these don't start to feel like generic, head in a box talking, and you can be really specific about a program when you're thinking about it and asking questions. I wanted to maybe give the residents a little more time to talk, and we sort of brought up the question of, from your interview process, which wasn't virtual for you guys, but knowing that a lot of it is the same, are there mistakes you made or things you wish you'd done differently or wished you knew about in advance that might have been helpful for you? Any of you want to get started on that, or I'll call on you?
I can start with it. Something that I would be more aware of than I was when I was going through it is I think that we're interested in child neurology, and that's what we want to do. And so I was very focused on like the PGY 4 and 5 years, because that's where the 3, 4, and 5 years, depending on the program where you're doing the child neurology, but you're spending a couple of years doing non-child neurology things before you get there. So really paying attention to the Gen Peds years and what that's like, and if it's a place that you would want to train general pediatrics before you get started is a good thing to do. Not just focusing on the child neuro years, but focusing on the kind of the whole package would be one thing to think about.
That's helpful. Dr. Rajgosh, do you have anything to add to that?
One thing I found that was really helpful going through the interview process was I kind of kept like a running rank list. So I know a lot of times what I've heard, like other applicants kind of feel like, as you see many programs, they all start to blur together, and it's hard to kind of figure out, what are the differences or what kind of things stood out. So as I was going through, I would just compare every single place to the places that I had been to before. And I thought that was really helpful to help me kind of differentiate too. And I'm sure also with like virtual interviews, it might be even more difficult because you don't get the vibe of the city and things like that to help stand out. So kind of reflecting right after you interview at a place to figure out, where do I think this fits from all the other places that I've been kind of helps, I think, differentiate them a little bit.
Thank you. That's helpful. And Dr. Morel, what
I was gonna,
if you knew?
I was gonna say that would have been helpful because I did not, as a disorganized person, I did not do that. But I did, like Dr. Siegel was saying, I did do a lot of focusing on looking at the pediatrics program, and specifically being someone who kind of was like, I'm going to do adult neuro forever and ever. And then last minute being like, actually, I like peds neurology. Oops. Focusing also on how the adult training is, because I think it's an integral part of what we do as child neurologists, is that we do this training, we learn the neuro exam, we learn pathology, we tested on it eventually. And being in a place that feels like you're learning a lot, but also you're comfortable with the people that are there and who you're going to interact with and those attending. So in a scary place where now you're taking care of adults was really important, and I'm glad that I was focusing on that too.
If I could make one more comment, kind of what Gayatri was saying about the reflecting after the interview process. I had like an Excel spreadsheet that I had all this data on, and I think that other people do this too. You put all these numbers, because we're number focused people in medicine. But I would also, at the end of the interview, I also would talk to my significant other about what I thought about it and kind of the vibes that I got. And then at the end of the season, you've thought about and interviewed at different places, and everything is kind of a jumble, and the spreadsheet was kind of a mess. But it was talking to that significant other, it doesn't have to be a romantic significant other, just somebody else that you trust, that you can kind of unload your thoughts on. And then at the end of the season or halfway through, they can kind of help you be like, well, that place A, you really seem to really like, and you may have forgotten what you said about it, but they won't. And having like another person as kind of a receptacle for all of your thoughts and neuroses is helpful in a lot of things, but in residency application as well.
Yeah, kind of adding to that too. I did a lot of journaling after each one of my interviews. That's another. I wasn't a spreadsheets person, but more of just another way to kind of reflect back on like big picture stuff, because I do think that ends up deciding too.
That's really helpful. I think one thing that sometimes comes up that maybe we can turn to the program directors to talk about is just the confusion of the relationship between the peds programs and PD neuro, the adult program and PD neuro, and even just the names of these different types of application. Is it categorical or advanced or reserved? Excuse me. And I wonder, Dr. Nelson, you had sort of pre-volunteered to talk a little bit about that if you want to start to address those questions.
Yeah, so first off, just sort of the basic things. So categorical program, one application, 5 years out of medical school with, or at least with no other graduate medical requisites. So the vast majority of applicants, that's what they apply to these days. And you'll very clearly have that outlined. Some people want to train one place for pediatrics and somewhere else for child neurology. And so the advanced programs make that possible, but then you have to get your own pediatric spot for either 2 or 3 years. There's also a number of other tracks I won't go into, but basically you have to get your own separate pediatric program you match to, and then you match to the advanced position several years in advance. And depending on where you are in your training, you want to do that, but you're basically essentially matching 2.5 years before you would start the child neurology training. The reserved positions are for people who have already done whatever their pediatric prerequisites are for, and then during that interview season, the next year, they'd immediately move into their final 3 years of neurology training. And there are fewer of those positions, but they change more year to year because they're often based off of sort of shufflings that have happened within individual residencies. So in terms of the individual residencies, that's that. When it comes to places that are within pediatrics versus neurology, you ask 5 different people, you'll get 5 different answers, often based on their own personal experience, their own opinions, those sorts of things. As someone who has been in locations where you had either or, I don't know that it matters that much. It's more about the strength of the pediatric program, the strength of the adults neurology program. A lot of the rest of the stuff is historical. If you're a giant freestanding children's hospital, they're probably in pediatrics, but they could still be affiliated with a really strong adult program, and that's not the end of the world. If they're a giant institution where there's not a separate freestanding children's hospital, more often they've been folded into neurology. And about 10 years or 20 years ago, a lot of the faculty that I knew would basically say, well, you really need all of both to be able to be sort of complete at the end of the day. And nowadays, I think people are a little bit less focused on whether or not they sit for their pediatric boards versus the child neurology boards. But the bottom line is going to be, it comes down to what you want to do with patients at the end of the day, and how you want to approach them, whether or not you're going to be dealing with all of their pediatric conditions, or are you going to be a subspecialist where having seen the spectrum from adult and pediatrics day in and day out instead of at different sites is more important to you. So I would think about those factors more than an one is automatically better approach.
Thank you. I know when Child Neuro went from the SF match to the NRMP, that most of these advanced programs did end up linking with the Child Neuro program. So you're not sort of searching separately. You might have to talk to both a PEDS program that's in a different campus, plus then Child Neuro at the main site. But often the match is kind of auto linked, which is nice. And each program can kind of explain that. It is a little bit complicated. I wonder, actually, maybe this is part of a question, whether Dr. Hallman Cooper can help us with this one, which is there anything that programs would like to know about applicants to ensure that they are genuinely passionate about caring for children? Kind of in the vein of, like, sometimes people come with a neurology interest and then realize, oh, it's actually child neuro. But even without that, even someone that's gone through med school, maybe knowing this, what can we show in an application that demonstrates that to programs?
So I mean, I think things that show consistency and show that you're genuinely interested are experiences that you've had on a longitudinal basis. So one, certainly, if your medical school has a PEDS neuro elective or rotation, you doing that, doing visiting rotations lets us know that you've gotten exposure to PEDS neuro, and that you've seen the type of patients that we take care of, and you know what you're getting into. So I personally like to see that you've done some rotations in PEDS neuro, recognizing that there are some limitations there with the pandemic. But then also, what type of extracurricular activities have you done? What type of community involvement have you been in related to children, or children with neurological needs can show that you're interested as well. Sometimes life experiences are what leads you to PEDS neurology too. And then certainly if you've done research in certain areas of PEDS neuro, that also displays to us that this person is kind of serious about this field and committed and has had significant exposure to it, knows the nuances of it, and is going to continue along the track to become a pediatric neurologist.
Thank you. I do think that there are people who haven't done any research, who become very successful child neurologists and are very successful applicants. And often what they've done is activities that have shown sort of, as you said, a longitudinal interest in the health of children. There are also people who've done research in a completely different field, unrelated to neurology, and that makes total sense to us. You know, you don't always find child neurologists early in your med school, and just that intellectual practice of understanding research is also looked upon, obviously, quite positively. And I think we all recognize, as I sort of alluded to at the beginning, that some people find child neuro a little bit later. Like maybe they knew they loved neuro conceptually, and then clinically, when they've had some little bit of experience with it, they realize that's my field. And I think even if you come upon that a little later, closer to your application, that's a great topic for a personal statement, like sort of how the light bulb went off or how I found my passion and what I imagine. And I think one of the questions had that directed a little bit to Dr. Morell, because she did make that decision. We're so glad she did, to move over to child neuro. And what is there any advice that you can give applicants who are maybe in that similar position about how they can present that process?
Yeah, I think so. What I did is, it's been a while since I remember the personal statement. One day I'll go back and read it. But I'm pretty sure I talked about that experience and my experience working, seeing child neurology, and then later seeing, like really doing like sub-Is and in adult neurology, and how the difference in patients really changed my view on like, what do I want to do for the rest of my life and why, and it kind of reflected on those experiences. So taking that space in my personal statement to elaborate on those things that are hard to glean when it seems like a last minute decision. It's something that you just showing that you're like toyed with that, and why you decided to choose one way or the other.
Thank you. I think I just wanted to say one thing at this, a little past our midpoint for this session, about the interviews themselves, which is that, as nervous as applicants are for their interview day, I can tell you the programs are equally as nervous. Like, this is our opportunity to tell you about our program, to recruit you, and and some of us aren't very good videographers, and our day in the life videos give everyone motion sickness, and we're sorry about that. But we really are as excited to tell you about our program and just get to meet you as a person as really anything else. To me, that's a huge aspect of the purpose of these interviews. So I think if you approach it that way, your applications were read. This program looked at your application and said, gosh, this seems like an amazing person that we would be very interested in having at our program. And you crossed that threshold already, that, take the interview with a little worry off your shoulders and onto ours. And that will help you be yourself a little bit more too, because it really is a huge part of it. And then I wonder, for the residents, are there any other things you wish you did or didn't do in your application or your interview process? These guys are super successful. I'm sure they're perfectly happy with what they did, or it was long ago.
I would say I wish I relaxed a little bit more, because I had this idea that this was such like an important thing. I needed to be very formal and follow whatever unwritten rules projected by some institution. I don't know. But I wish I would, in some places when I was having this intense anxiety, just be myself, relax more, like try to really feel how I would fit in with the program, or feel how I could work with the people that are interviewing me, because that's what we're here to do, to learn from those people. So that's one thing I think I could have changed.
Anything from Dr. Raj Ghosh?
I think what Ben said about having like a list of questions was helpful. I think that was something that I learned later on, kind of seeing what other questions people would ask is kind of how I got my repertoire of questions. But kind of going into it, I think as just have like a generic set, and then as you kind of go through interviews, you can kind of tailor them more to things that you actually are, things that are important to you, or things that'll help kind of change your decision.
And Dr. Siegel, any other things you wish you hadn't done or wish you had done?
It might be a very specific, there might be a minority of people who are in this situation, but if you're somebody who's, I knew I wanted to do neurology and pediatrics from early on, and I even had a specific specialty in mind. I kind of had an idea of what I wanted, and I think that if that is you, and I think it's probably the minority of people, but if that's you, then don't be afraid to look into that subspecialty or that area, that niche that you're interested in. Because so, for example, if you want to do pediatric movement disorders and that's like your thing and that's what you want to do, there's not a lot of pediatric movement disorder true specialists in the country. There's a couple of like good institutions where they do them. And so you might want to look into that, or even if that's really what you want to do, reach out to the person at that institution that does that thing and say, oh, can we meet, or ask your interviewers if maybe they can set up a time to talk, or if there's a research opportunity. If there's a clinical interest, that's one thing, but if there's a research interest, then going ahead and trying to put out those feelers, because if those sorts of things are important to you, then you want to be somewhere where that little thing in that little corner of the world is actually happening.
That's super important. I did want to talk just about a couple of logistical things, and I'm going to pop some of this over to the other two program directors. One is just to clarify that child neurology is not using a supplemental application. They're not doing signaling or any of those things. While pediatrics is, it still should remain optional, and most of the programs that have a categorical link, you're only applying to child neuro anyways, so it won't be part of that. That's been a little confusing this year because some other programs like adult neurology is potentially using that supplementary application, but it's kind of program by program. So I'm glad the child neuro isn't doing it this year, because it seems a little confusing to be only partially adopted. And then I wanted to maybe bring up, although a question hasn't been asked about this in this particular forum, I hear it often about the sort of second look opportunities that come up, and what's the official word on that. And maybe for that, since we've talked about this a little, I'll turn that to Dr. Nelson.
Sure. So we've moved to virtual interviews. We're trying to make it a more equitable thing. It arose out of the pandemic, but there's been a lot of benefits that have come out of that. So if second looks become a thing that everyone needs to do, and they're directly involved with the programs, then that's really just shifting the interview process down the road, right? Like, so that defeats the whole purpose. And in fact, just adds a whole nother layer. So to be very clear, there really shouldn't be formal second look processes, either that are expected or that are involved with the training people. It shouldn't be used, just as Dr. Foster-Barber was saying, it shouldn't be used as preference signaling, because we're really not participating in that. And the last thing you want is to feel like you have to try and show up to somehow otherwise signal that you're interested in the program. So really, that's not a thing. You know, for places where you literally already are, do I think it's bad to go and see what you can see, which is going to be variable from place to place? No, it makes sense to want to know where you're going to spend the next, possibly 5+ years of your life. But it's really supposed to be separate from anything that would have to do with the interview process, how the programs are making decisions, or something that would give someone who has the means or resources to do that way more than someone else a leg up, and to make it unfair from that perspective, if that makes sense.
Thanks. Yeah, and I'm actually really appreciative to both AAN and the Child Neuro Society for just making that statement, because I think it decreases the stress and the expense and the question of equity, which can come up otherwise. And who knows what future years of interviews will look like, but for this year, at least we know what it'll look like. Then I think we haven't had a lot of questions about international medical grads applying in child neuro, but there is a question here about letters of recommendation and whether those from US clinicians carry more weight versus those from the home country for an international medical graduate. I wonder, Dr. Hallman Cooper, if I can have you address that briefly.
Sure. I think it goes back to what Dr. Nelson said earlier in the webinar. Your best letter of recommendations are going to come from those individuals who know you on a personal level, who know your work ethic, who know your funded knowledge, who've seen you do clinical practice, et cetera. So what we're looking for in those letters is information about how do you function as a student, how you may function as a resident. How do you process information? How do you combine like your basic science knowledge and translate that into clinical skills, et cetera. So we're not looking for that it came from a certain individual. We're more so looking for a letter that describes you and gives us a better feel of how you would fit with our program.
Thank you. I think the other question, which is also relating to international medical graduates, is sort of the how far since you graduated, how many years since you graduated to when you're applying, and how much of an impact that has on the application. I don't know for either the two other program directors if you have an answer to that.
I don't know that a lot of great data exists, so any answer I give will be a personal one. I would think the most important thing is to, again, give an honest and open narrative, because if I see that there's been a long gap and there's no explanation, again, I can give someone the benefit of the doubt, or I can have fears run away with like what was going on. And again, there may be very good reasons for that have nothing to do with your strength as a candidate. And in fact, explaining it might strengthen your application. Or there could be reasons that, yes, one time around you were not successful, but still, as already noted, you're better off addressing that up front. That's never going to escape or be camouflaged when we review these, because there's a small enough application pool that we look through everything in a great deal of detail, and we'll appreciate it much more if you can directly recognize that, give an insightful thought about what happened the first time around, and therefore what has changed or what action you've taken. That if there's a real deficiency, to address it. If there wasn't, to at least address whatever happened the first time around. So that matters much more than the exact number of years from my perspective.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Right now, we don't have any other questions in the Q&A, although I invite folks to ask more if they'd like. I thought it might be fun to go around each of us and answer one question, and you can choose between these two. The first is maybe, why did you choose child neurology? Or perhaps, what's the favorite part of your day as a child neurologist? I'm sitting here in clinic. I had patients right up until this, and I have a couple more when we're done. And this has been an amazing day. So I'm answering what's the favorite part of my day. And I think it's really sort of the intellectual stimulation of thinking about neurology in the amazing development timeline of a child, and really the way you have to think through the localization and the development while you're looking at this person, but also just the way this field has grown. Things that when I was a trainee, we didn't even understand, or we had no treatments for, that we now try to diagnose quickly because we have amazing therapies. I think this day in clinic to me has demonstrated the whole breadth of that. And it's just a regular old day. So I think that's what I love about child neuro. And I'm sure others will have comments. Maybe Dr. Nelson, I'll have you go first.
Sure. I'll answer both together super quickly because they're the same thing. So I was originally going to be a zoological neuroscientist. I only decided to go to med school very late, and then I was like, I'm going to be a researcher. And then as I kept going along each way, I was like, no, actually, I like working with people. And the best part of my day, honestly, I'm a little biased against teenagers. I love it when the exam is playing with a child, whenever else do you get to just go and you can go from room to room, and half of it is you're making funny faces or you're playing or you're watching what they do. And it's incredibly fun, and it's just emotionally rewarding because basically you get to sort of play and interact with children all across the developmental spectrum, and it's great.
Thank you. Dr. Hellman Cooper.
Yeah, for me, it's sort of the same too. My favorite part of the day, as well as why I went into child neurology. It's definitely getting a chance to interact very closely with children and interacting with their families. I feel like as we take care of the child, we're also taking care of the family. As we promote healthy habits in the child, we're promoting healthy habits for that full family. And it's the intellectual stimulation. So I just love the variety of child neurology. You know, you go in, you see a headache, or you go in and you see developmental delay, or you're seeing a muscular dystrophy. So many different things. Myself, I'm a general neurologist. So many different things that I get to see throughout the day. And it keeps me interested and invested in going back. Okay, let me refresh my memory on this condition or that condition, and reading all the time. So it feels like I'm constantly learning, and I love that part of it.
Thank you. Dr. Morale, what's your favorite part of the day, or why did you choose that?
I chose it because I love playing with children. And I think, yes, adults are fun too and intellectually stimulating, but just being able to like bend down, you know, at the child's level and just play. And I have toys in my bag, just amazing new tools, and learning how to use them, and just seeing, like today I saw a newborn baby and seeing a teenager in the next room, and just having to tailor my examination based on the age is just so much fun. And we get to see so much interesting pathology, but we like echoing what Dr. Hellman Cooper was saying, is that we are so privileged to be able to treat a child and support their family in some of the most difficult times of a family's life. So being able to learn and support families and guide them through sometimes really difficult things has been really impactful, and makes me continue to like doing what I do.
Thank you so much. Dr. Raj Ghosh, excuse me.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I would say I would agree with everything that everyone else has said. I think the play is kind of like the most consistent part of my day. Like every single day I get to play with a kid. And I think that sometimes gets me through some of the hardest days of just having those few moments of just, you know, sometimes you have to fake it initially to put that smile on, but then eventually you're playing and it becomes like a genuine happy moment, and it kind of gets me through the day often. The other thing too of like being there for families and kind of supporting them through some of the hardest moments, I think is also a really moving moment. It makes me feel like I have a lot of sense of purpose too, which I think is something, you know, medicine is a hard field to be in, and you have to find ways to make it purposeful and make your day get by. And I think those two things together are kind of what make all of the challenges that come along with medicine more bearable and worth it for me.
So nicely said. Thank you. Dr. Siegel.
I know we have 2 minutes, so I'll be quick. I wrote my personal statement about a patient that I saw that had a degenerative neurologic disease. He was a toddler, and I kind of how that impacted me and the relationships that I saw him form with neurologists over time. And now I'm 5 years away from that experience, and it's really been fun to actually, now I'm the one forming those relationships with families. And even though these diseases that we treat are often or sometimes not curable, And patients sometimes don't do well, but a lot of times they do. And to be able to like walk that journey with families and also have the intellectual stimulation of localization and thinking about neurophysiology and pharmacology and physiology and stuff, it's been an incredibly satisfying thing to grow into this field, motivated by some of those very human things that I think a lot of us go into medicine for.
Thank you so much. So I think we're wrapping up. So I want to thank the entire panel for taking this time and for being so open. And I want to thank the AAN for organizing this. And we'll end by just wishing all the applicants good luck. We can't wait to see your applications. And we can't wait to welcome you to the field. Thanks so much, everybody.